to the Roundtable podcast. I am Shogun. Today is a very special Ralph Day celebration, including the annual Ralph Day Ralph interview. This will be the third time that Ralph has been interviewed on the server, once live event only, second time very good interview you can find in member podcasts and RT podcast section of the Roundtable Discord server. And this will be the third one, and today is very special because Kasheka will do the interview, our new interviewer, along with myself. And before we get into this, we will probe the mysteries of the universe with Ralph, spirituality, and more. Make sure you find the 250 plus Roundtable podcast episodes on both YouTube and BitChute. And make sure you subscribe and follow. Keep an eye on announcements because we're having lots of big events in the next few days and weeks. Welcome, Ralph. Happy Ralph Day. How are you, my friend?
Happy Ralph Day, my brother. Thank you. A very happy Passover to everyone as well. And I want to make sure that we pay some honor to that sacred tradition that that's going on right now. A lot of people feasting and celebrating and their families, and also people celebrating the resurrection of Christ through the Easter ceremonies, Easter being tomorrow, and happy Easter to everyone as well.
So, happy Easter, happy Passover, and happy Ralph Day. So, I'm going to allow Kasheka to begin the interview now, and she's going to ask you whatever questions she likes about whatever topic she likes. I may or may not chime in, but I probably will not. And then when you guys are ready, you can just indicate. We're going to open it up for the audience Q&A or discussion. You may have topics in mind. Last time we talked about spirituality, things like the afterlife, karma, or destiny, and things of those nature, but the conversation go anywhere and everywhere. And I think, maybe after Kasheka, if there's things that I want to ask too, I will. But for now, I'm just going to hand the mic over to Kasheka, but I'll say, hi, Kasheka. How are you, my friend?
Hello, I'm great. And yes, welcome to Ralph, and happy Ralph Day. I know I was asking you earlier what it was that you wanted to talk about, and you were telling me quite a few topics. So I was wondering if you just wanted to start with one of those, and we'll go from there.
Well, sure. Last time the main focus was on, it was called the Meaning of Life podcast, and so we talked about, the kind of like reincarnation and, meaning of the purpose of, things that we go through in life and all that kind of stuff. And I talked about just kind of real quick, kind of seeing strong elements of truth in most traditions very much, and just, being able to recognize a pattern. And that's, to me, it's really, and it really applies well to what I wanted to talk about tonight. It's kind of an extension of that. So, once you kind of understand how I look at, the spiritual aspect, kind of meanings behind things, then it kind of goes into, well, how does that fit with science, and how does the science of it, how does that fit with the idea of freedom, which is something that I'm really big on, and it's a large integral part of my worldview, right? That we didn't really get into too much then, especially like theory about, what form or forms of government would be preferable to others, and all that. But it all fits in together, right? So it's kind of something that I can yarn on for a little bit about. So, there's anybody that's talked to me much about how I kind of look at things knows that I'm very much trying to get people to examine, like I did, the unintended consequences of, uh, well-intentioned acts. People try to find ways to make things better with problems that go on in the world, um, and so freedom tends to be the best way, and the use of or legitimizing the use of force through a government is something that personally I feel like should be done only as a response to um, like violence or coercion or theft is a form of violence in my view, and we've argued about what these words mean, but to me it's all very you know any theft. If you steal from someone and you're taking from the fruits of their labor that they've bled, sweat, and cried to produce, then you are that to me is violent. So you might not be physically attacking them, but you are attacking right part of them in a sense, and that also so figures into well, a big reason that governments even exist, where people want to give power over, delegate power rather, to others to protect them, is because people steal from each other, and they do damage to each other, and they attack each other and hurt each other, and they do terrible things to each other, and it's an attempt to try to find a way to mitigate that and suppress it and deal with it, um, that does not involve people taking matters into their own hands. Like, oh, well, that guy won't stop letting his dog shit on my lawn, so therefore I'm going to pick up the shit and I'm going to go smear it all over his front door, right? So, government offers us a way to mediate, and also a way to punish. And punishment isn't the main goal of any kind of incarceration or anything, but protecting people from people who have demonstrated that they are dangerous to others. I think is the primary responsibility that would be justifiable like that, right? But what governments tend to do in the modern first world, Western, even Eastern, whatever, but they are very much more intrusive in people's lives and the decisions they allow them to make, and all the reasons that are given for why they're allowed to do so. It's always comes down to, well, we want to prevent this or that entity from abusing, um, and the problem is that um, this idea that the answer is always to resort to force and to delegate um, justifiable ability to use force to others when there's not violence or damage to property involved, is dangerous. But this all kind of fits together. So it does say in the Bible, I believe it's the 3rd Corinthians verse 17, but the verse basically says, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is right. And I love that verse. That's something that people think like me, versus people that think like me, they tend to like it too.
Can you repeat that, because you were breaking up a little bit when you were repeating the verse?
The verse is basically, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Uh, and so it's it's a verse that resonates with a lot of people who have um, libertarian sensibilities like myself, and or Christian like myself. I consider myself a Christian. Right? I was raised a Christian, um, but at the same time, there's a lot that I would disagree with a lot of Christians, right? And that's neither here nor there. That's not what I wanted to talk about tonight. Anyway, uh, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Right. So that's a pretty strong statement, and seems like a pretty good endorsement of the idea that freedom is what the Lord intends. Right. So, to me, what does freedom mean? What is freedom about? There's a really good guy named Michael Badnarik. He was the Libertarian candidate for president in 1984. He has been teaching a class called Constitution class for over 20 years. It lasts about 8 hours long. He has put it in a recorded format that you can watch on YouTube. It's excellent. I highly recommend it to everyone, no matter what your political ideas or theories are. It's very, very interesting. You're more than welcome to watch it and disagree with it, and I'd love to talk to you about what you disagree with. But he starts at the very beginning with the causes for revolution in America, and talks about the original intent of the crafters of the Declaration and Constitution. And you know, these ideas are really new in the history of the world, right? Tyranny is very old. Tyranny has existed for thousands of years in many forms. But freedom, absolute freedom for the individual to act as long as they are not interfering with the similar freedom of others, is a very new idea. Because before America had its revolution on any large scale, for throughout recorded history, has not such a thing existed. And so basically, the king of England, before the revolution in America, could come in anyone's house he wanted, and agents of the king could do the same. And you had no right to keep them out. You had no right to any privacy from them. They didn't have to justify coming in your house. It was basically their house, and that's something that Badrick talks about. He stresses that it's well understood in the theory that was used to craft the law in America that your rights are derived from ownership, from property. And so, my body belongs to me. The fruits of my labor belong to me. They don't belong to others. And so the fruits of my labor belonging to me and being my possession, then I get to decide what is done or not done with the fruits of my labor, my possessions. It is not for others to decide. I don't need to ask permission. The moment that you have to ask permission to do anything, it is a sure indicator that whatever is in question, the property does not belong to you, because if it did, you wouldn't have to ask permission. The buck stops with the owner, right? So this concept is so lost in today's world, and with the way people typically approach, even people who call themselves conservative, typically, right? They only maybe partially grasp some aspects of this, but people that call themselves liberal, the more liberal they get, the more likely they are to understand other parts. But it's incomplete on each side. The people who are on the far right, they can understand fiscal conservatism, but they don't understand leaving the government out of people's personal choices and how they choose to live their lives, their lifestyles. Like the conservatives are more into allowing them to interfere with people's lifestyle. And then on the other side, the people on the far left, they don't think you should be able to keep, it's not even your first place, right? But they do understand that maybe we shouldn't be running over an empire. And they do understand that, if two grown men want to enter into an agreement and call it marriage, that's between them and God, whoever else or whatever. It's not for the government to say, it's a contract, right? That's what marriage is. And George and Martha Washington didn't have marriage license, right? But they were married. You go try telling George and Martha they weren't married, good luck with that. And that's something Badrick talks about too. But all of this, right? All of this whole freedom, spirituality, and science. Science works into the two, right? So here we're going to get to science and how it's linked in. Okay, so economics is a science, and there was a man named Ludwig von Mises. He was Austrian, and he's really important to check out because he wrote a book called Human Action, a treatise on economics. And When you start to understand that economics reaches everything, every part of everything you do is actually can be broken down into economics. Every interaction you have with every other human has an economic element to it, right? Even your feelings. Your feelings play into economics more than you realize, right? It's all linked together. It's all economics includes everything. And when you start to understand that the more freedom you give to the individual to make their own choices in the market, the more excellence can be found, and the less reliance is placed on government to come up with written regulations to try to keep corporate abuse from happening. And the more you actually use the ability to protect private property that the government has, which is justifiable to come back and say to corporations that do damage to other people's property, right? So here's a good example. The EPA doesn't do shit when it comes to protecting the environment. Okay, the environment's getting destroyed, and these companies, they're allowed to pay what are, to me, fines that might seem big but are nowhere near big enough, and they're allowed to continue operating. Well, see, my attitude is if you're like 3M, I don't know if anybody knows, but 3M had to pay the state of Minnesota several $billions for poisoning the water and giving a bunch of people cancer. And that's just one example, but that company should have been completely shut down. The people that were responsible for that happening should not be allowed to be involved together in any corporate entity, right? And they should spend time in jail because their negligence, okay, caused people to get cancer. So, people who say libertarians don't believe in holding these corporations responsible do not understand how powerful that the tools that we're talking about are and how powerless the tools that are being used are, right? 3M is still a company. The people that are in the company are still working there. The people that are responsible for this, and they were able to basically jack their prices up and use the fucking extra money they make to pay for the fines. Well, that solves the problem for them, and people are just going to end up paying more for their crap. So, that's just one example of, I can, there's people, anytime you try to use the government to control people's decisions and you take away their freedom, right? It's well intentioned, but it always backfires because it's meant to backfire. And that comes back to the whole spiritual aspect of it. So science, spirituality, and freedom, they're all linked together. You have more spiritual growth. And if you realize that freedom is the scientific method to the greatest abundance for the most possible. So if you care about people being fed, if you care about people having more and being happier, that doesn't come from centralized control and people and arbitrary people making arbitrary decisions what economic decisions we should make. People in Washington, D.C. shouldn't be the ones to sit here and decide what decisions we can make for ourselves and our families and our lives. And something, a point that Shogun and I have talked about this some, and he will bring up. Well, we can't let someone cook meth in their house because it's super dangerous. And you're right, you can't let someone cook meth in their house if you think it's not their house. But if it's their house, then they can cook meth in. The problem is that when someone causes an issue, when they damage somebody else's property or they kill somebody or kill themselves, if they kill themselves, then it takes care of the problem. But if they hurt somebody else, then like actually hurt them, by causing an explosion or something, or they poison the air and somebody gets hurt by that, well, then my attitude is put them in jail for life. But if they haven't done any harm to anybody, then there's no reason to put them in jail. People do dangerous shit all the time, stupid, dangerous shit, right? That can kill lots of people. I mean, I seen some shit the other day. Somebody was driving in such a way that he almost hit 3 cars within 6 seconds trying to squeeze in between them. And the number of people that he took a risk of killing just then was, I mean, that, well, that, and that's another thing. Okay, so that leads to the next thing. So, well, yeah, what are you going to do to the kid? Well, if the road was private, I would say then you can't ever come on the road again. And if you do, then you're trespassed forever, right? You can't come on this private property. But because we have a government that is in charge of the roads, they have to be both like overbearing about how often they pull people over, but also too lenient with people who are fucking idiots and should not be on the road, right? Because, well, we got to let them drive, otherwise how are they going to get to work? And they have a right to go to work and shit. It's like, no, they don't have a right to drive on the road. If people knew that if you could weed people out like that, you wouldn't have to worry about bad drivers, man, because all the bad drivers wouldn't be allowed on the roads. But everyone's like, well, no, you'd have to pay a toll. Well, you wouldn't have to pay tax because your tax money wouldn't be used to pay the toll. And by the way, they're using tax money to build roads anyway, and they're still charging tolls, even though the road's paid for already. And the road's still privately owned, but the state is the one patrolling it. Look, I can go on and on, but I believe that there's a spiritual aspect to all this, and that it's like that for a reason. I believe that part of the test that we go through in life is to not use power against others unless it's absolutely necessary. Like if basically if it's not worth killing someone over, then it shouldn't be a law. Like, for instance, right? It's illegal to sell a single cigarette on the street. It's technically against the law for an adult to sell a cigarette to another adult on the street because of some tax bullshit or whatever. But it's against the law is the point. Now, is it worth anyone? It isn't worth anyone ever being killed to try to prevent people from selling cigarettes to each other. Is there anyone in here? Please speak up. If anyone in this room right now listening thinks that it would be justified to ever kill a person to try to prevent one person selling a cigarette. Anyone?
No.
I didn't think so. Right? Okay, so that's your test. If you apply that same test to any law and that's the answer you get, it shouldn't be a law, because enforcing laws requires guys with guns to go in. And if they get resisted, those guys with guns are likely to kill people. So do you really think it's that important for people not to be able to sell cigarettes to each other? No, I don't. And then it's like, well, where do you draw the line? But that's where you got to draw it. And so if you don't think about things in those terms, if you think, well, the problem is not that, it's just the police know better trauma, and they need to be taught that they need to be using non-lethal stuff, which is probably true as well. But the whole point is that when you start saying adults can't sell cigarettes to each other, when you start passing so many laws that this kind of minutia is actually, people are actually spending time thinking about, it's a complete waste of resources and energy and effort. Think of how much wasted effort has gone into the war on drugs. And it's not totally wasted, to be honest, because it makes a lot of people a lot of money. The cartels and the people who make all of the gear for all of the riot police and everything else, and the law enforcement, there's a huge job security element that comes from drugs being illegal. And it's completely unproductive. It doesn't stop drugs, right? But some people do make a lot of money. So, it's a perfect example of freedom being the answer, right? Let adults do what they want. The only time where you really have to start getting invasive with people's free choices is when it comes to like when kids are involved, because people obviously shouldn't say, well, I think my kids should be able to smoke crack, so whatever. So I mean, you do have to start drawing lines when kids are. But I think that most people are kind of that shit, and I still think that in most cases, in a lot of cases, there is too much emphasis on some things and not enough on another when it comes to protecting kids from bad parents, right? Because there are situations where kids need to be protected from bad parents or bad guardians or whatever. But that's the extreme that okay, like, yeah, let's have a government, let's have them ready to step in when shit goes, you know, to that extreme. But that's what we need to do. Shit like situations, where we're trying to protect those that can't protect themselves the most. Um, you know, but even still, this idea that we need a cop on every street is all they are glorified security guards, really, right? We're just paying them to be the ones who are on duty to deal with bullshit. And the only difference between a cop and a security guard is
Are you there? You were breaking up. Ralph?
Ralph, are you there? Can you hear me? Ralph?
Yeah, it looks like we lost him.
I'm going to try and disconnect him, and we will see if he comes back. No worries. I'm sure he'll be back in a second.
I thought that was me.
No, everything's going great. Thank you.
Can
Hi,
you hear?
Ralph.
all
Can
right.
you?
Sorry.
There he is. Sorry. Go ahead. We'll stitch that in. No worries. Just continue wherever you remember that you left off.
Well, I was just finishing up mainly by saying I do really believe that part of the test of life, part of, because we get tested, right? Spiritually, like I think life is in many ways a test. And one of the biggest tests is for us not to succumb to the temptation to give over the power of protecting ourselves and each other to others, and to absolve ourselves of the responsibility of ourselves, because freedom, and I do need to mention this too, responsibility is the is the foundation of freedom. So you can't have freedom without responsibility. And if you understand that being responsible for your actions, is you're going to be responsible for them not just in this life but in any afterlife or future lifetimes or anything, right? If you understand that you are the one who is responsible for you in every way, um, that's part of it too. So um,
So
I
that
do
was helped.
believe that has a lot to do with the spiritual meaning of life, is passing that test of learning how to work with each other and deal with the problems we have with as much self-reliance and self-responsibility as absolutely possible. And that word voluntary association is absolutely critical with everything I'm saying. And whenever possible, consenting adults should be allowed to voluntarily associate however they wish, as long as everyone is consenting, right? So there you go.
I was just wanting you to elaborate on what you mean by voluntary association. Like, is it that you're saying basically, like you were explaining, that consenting adults, basically when there's people that are associating in a certain way and they're choosing to do so, so they're taking responsibility of their own freedom? Is that what you mean?
Absolutely. Right. So let's say you and I decided we wanted to go into business together. We drew up a contract. Um, and we made an agreements under the contract. It shouldn't be up to any outside party or government to come in and say, well, part of this agreement, we will not allow you guys to agree to do this or do that, right? And we're not talking about anything that involves interfering with anybody else's freedom. We're just talking about whatever the terms of the agreement. Say that I agree to pay you. Here, this is a perfect example, right? You want to come work for me, and I want to pay you $5 an hour. Well, the government's going to come in and say, no, the minimum wage is $7.50 an hour. So it's against the law for you and I to contract together for you to work for me for $5 an hour. I'm the one that's going to get punished under the law, not you, for making that agreement, right? But it's against the law for us to make that agreement. And so, the idea is, well, we need to protect people from businesses that will take advantage of them by not paying them enough. That's why we need to have wage and have it increasing. But this is another, and I'm happy to dig in. Just basically to sum it up, that's just another government regulation that backfires. It causes problems, and it doesn't solve the problems that it was meant to solve.
So that's invading in the people's free will, I guess what you were talking about earlier, their freedom to be able to choose to consent to each other with whatever it is that they're agreeing upon, right?
Correct.
You were saying that basically in life we're all being tested constantly. What do you mean by that?
Well, I believe that, part of the meaning of life is that, we choose the potential lives that we can come into, and that we know all the different potential decisions we could make before we even get to being alive. And we set for ourselves challenges that we know from the perspective we have in the fifth dimension, or whatever you want to call it, heaven. We know from that perspective what challenges we need to set before us in order for ourselves to grow spiritually. And so, some people are very ambitious in the potential lives they choose for themselves. Some are not as ambitious. Someone, to me, like Jesus Christ, would be someone who had set forth potential life for himself, that he fulfilled his highest potential in every possible way, right? And I'm not saying that's all Jesus Christ was. I'm not trying to reduce him to just another human being that just happened to check all the boxes. That's not what I'm saying, so please don't take it that way anyway. But I am saying that it would be hard for you to argue against the idea that Christ did not fulfill his absolute highest potential in his life as a human. So that's something that I think most, if not all, Christians are going to say, you're right, I can't argue that, right? So I think that we all fall somewhere on that spectrum, that we all have a highest potential, each one of us. And we know what that highest potential is before we even enter the flesh, but we forget, because it's necessary to forget in order for the challenge to mean anything. And it is that the reason why you got so many people saying that, it could be a simulation, or it's like a simulation, is really because in many ways what I'm saying is saying that we are entering here knowing but we're turning off our ability to remember as we enter, so that this game we enter, and it is a game. There's a reason why games have been made for spiritual reasons in many cultures for years. They have a spiritual aspect to them very often. That's because life is a game, right? And when we are living, it's our better we play the game, the better score we're going to have at the end, and the more we're going to take away from the life that we've chosen. But even if we only fulfill the tiniest part of our potential, we've still made progress. And even the people who do a terrible job of fulfilling their potential, and they're basically assholes or pieces of shit in life, they still serve this greater purpose, right? Because they're part of the challenge. The other people who are doing a better job, their challenge is more meaningful because they got to deal with these assholes. And it all fits together, man. It's real. right? It makes sense out of everything to me. But yeah, I don't know if
So
that addresses your question very well, but
yeah, well, basically, I was just going to ask how are people tested throughout their lives to be able to achieve those potentials that they set out for themselves prior to being born? How do you see the testing? Is it because of their choices based on their?
well, an example I like to use is Adolf Hitler, right? Because I feel like he's someone who, before he was born, he had very ambitious potential, highest potential that he had set forth for himself. But because it was such an ambition, a high ambition that also had the potential, there's negative potential with any positive, right? So he happened to fulfill more of his negative potential, like Weibo, right? Okay, so this is the double-edged sword that it is. And I actually do believe that sometimes when you hear double-edged sword mentioned in scripture, that maybe it's talking about this aspect, this duality. It is through duality, it's through the potential for negative to occur that we are even able to have an opportunity to fulfill our highest potential. And so it's a valuable gift that the potential exists there for negative. That doesn't mean it's good that there's negative, right? It's the negative that gives the positive meaning. It's the negative that makes the positive. So when you start to understand things on that level, it doesn't mean you like what's negative, but you understand its place in the whole scheme of things. And it takes the sting out of it. It makes it less fearsome in a way. Um, it disempowers. This idea that like there's real evil out there and that it's going to swallow people. I think that believing in that gives it energy and makes it more likely to happen. Like you're manifesting, right? But if you don't give it that energy, if you see it as just the shadow that's cast by the light, it is the necessary um, um, potential, that's negative. It's there because the potential for positive is there. So to me, that's like what forgiveness is about. And that's when we start seeing these verses about forgiveness in scriptures, not just Christian, but Christianity does talk a lot about it. Judaism talks a lot about it, and Islam, right? The big three over here. Forgiveness is big. It's in the whole scheme of things. And when you can start to forgive the whole aspect of creation that seems negative, and it is negative, it's part of understanding that that it's um, it's integral to the whole thing. I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but
Well, I was thinking about a couple of things with that, but talking about the forgiveness part, how does that affect uh, the potential, the positive or negative aspects that you were talking about, in your
well, that's
opinion?
a great question, right? So I think that we influence each other too, right? And I think that when we're forgiving of each other for our trespasses, which the Bible teaches us to do, when we live that way, we are. It is the most powerful gift we can give to someone else who has fallen short, because what they need is not someone um, to go to them and say, "This is what you did wrong, and I hate you for it. You should have never done that." Well, of course, they should have never done it, but hating them for it's not the answer. Forgiving them and trying to put the faith in them that they could change their ways um, and redeem themselves for what they've done wrong is the most powerful thing another person can do to try to help the person in question turn around their life and not do whatever terrible thing it was again, right?
So is that all part
So
of the testing?
I'm sorry.
Is that all part of the testing?
I think it is absolutely, and maybe testing is the wrong word. I mean, I think that uh, it, the point is that you will be judged by yourself, by your own actions. Your own actions, it's not even so much that like, there's an entity that you think of as God sitting there watching what you do and waiting for you to do something wrong to add to your list of punishments. Whoever created everything that we're part of built into the design of the matrix that we're in, that when we do terrible things to each other, we will suffer for it. It's automatic. It's cause and effect. And some people call it karma, right? But I don't think it's a matter of like an arbitrary decision gets made. Well, you know, I think it's more built in, and it's automatic. And it's so, people talk about intelligent design, like I believe in design. I believe there's a blueprint behind all parts of existence, and that only the only way anything is ever physical is if it's first mental, that it exists on the mental plane, and that this mental mentality, this supreme mentality, is whatever God there is that supreme mentality, that supreme intelligence that flows through everything. And everything is put together intricately that way, and it's automatic. It's so it's so well designed. Like when you start to look at God as being an entity that was able to put things together so perfectly that everything works automatically, and it's built in, right? I don't know if anyone's ever looked at things that way, but that's definitely how I look at things. And the more I look for things to make sense in that way, the more the universe responds to me by saying, yes, that is the way it is, and confirming it. Like affirmations happen all the time when you start to look for them, you recognize them. It's whatever you want to call God or the universe, that force will communicate with you if you are paying attention and you are looking. And if you seek, you shall find, right?
Yeah, you were touching on some metaphysics. So the act of forgiveness itself, is that basically just bringing kind of the energies, instead of doing the positive or negative, basically bringing the energies to like a neutral? Is that how you see that?
I don't say no. I think it swings it totally in the other direction. So, the most powerful thing you can do for someone in general is to have faith in them. And if someone else has broken your faith, the hardest thing to do is to have faith in them despite them. But if you don't have faith in them, then you're doing nothing to improve the chances that they're going to improve their behavior. If you put faith in them, that even the ones that don't deserve it, guess what? That's the best thing you can do to make them more worthy, to increase the possibility that they'll be more worthy of such faith. And so that's why, once again, like faith, hope, and love. I think that faith is more that when faith keeps getting repeated in the Bible, it is not just talking about like having faith in what the scripture says, and just faith in a God that you can't see standing in front of you necessarily, right? It's also faith in your brothers and your sisters, because we're all in this together. And when you start to recognize that we are all part of this, is that we're all connected, that we're not separate, that separateness is an illusion, right? It's part of the illusion that is necessary for this whole exercise to be taking place. And so when you start to recognize that, and you start to look for, I get along with a lot of different people that don't get along with each other. I think most of you can agree to that. And part of the reason is because with every passing day, I am better and better at realizing what I have in common with other people and looking for it and trying to get others to do that with each other. All of us have more in common than we have different. We can argue about little whatever, but the more we argue about it, the bigger we make it, right? And we're looking, our minds it's like a dog. It likes to sink its teeth into a bone, right? So the part of us that is powerful at thinking, it wants another powerful thinking to come and have an argument with. And that's fun sometimes. It can be productive and fun and great. But there is also something very important to be said for recognizing that which is in you in another. I mean, we all of us have more in common with a fucking fish than we do different, much less each other. So the idea that we should ever, any of us, be enemies with any of other one is, I mean, you're going to make enemies if you're looking for them. But if you're looking to solve those, to heal those wounds, and to recognize, and part of all this process too, I really believe, is a fragmenting, like the parts of the creator separate and then they come back together, right? So it's like a remembrance and a restoration, and it's a process that goes in and out. So I mean, that's how I approach it. And I think that a lot of esoteric traditions and religious and spiritual traditions have echoes of all this. I've been to some Mormon services. People love to make things, and I don't like it at all when people make fun of it. There's some things that I don't necessarily, understand why some people believe some things, but I try to. I try to see the value in it. I try to have respect for it and honor it as much as I can, as long as, I mean, there's certain practices, certain things, and certain sects and tribes, whatever. But for the most part, most people, I believe, we all have a similar vision of paradise for a reason. I believe we all have a shared goal that we're all part of. And I mean, it seems to me, all of this seems to be like kind of a no-brainer. You know what I mean? And I think about it a lot, but it's like the more I think about it, the more I'm like, I can think until I'm blue in the face, but this isn't even about thinking, right? Because you can't really wrap your mind around this. It's that huge. It is mind blowing. Like, and at a certain point, you just have to turn your mind off and let go and feel your connectedness with everything else and everything else. And when you do, there you are.
I guess that's when you can recognize yourself, like you were saying, in others, and then the act of forgiveness is something that puts into that collective of everyone that's connected. Is that what you mean?
Oh yeah. It's forgiving other people is like a giving back good energy, right? It's a response. You're getting bad energy and you're responding to it with good energy when you don't have to. You're making the choice to. Now think about what happens if you don't do that. Think about the negative fallout that can happen if you don't forgive someone. Think about the potential positive if you do, and the potential negative if you. To me, it seems like forgiving another is going to end up having the least possible harm involved, and not forgiving another has more potential harm.
I guess that's where the
So
testing comes into place, right? Like you were talking about earlier. I know you're saying that testing may not have been the right word, but with each situation, it seems to me like you're saying that if a person chooses to not forgive, well, what do you believe happens to a person in that situation?
well, I believe that they suffer as much as the person that they would refuse to forgive, if not more. The Buddha said that anger is like a hot coal, and when you clutch it, it burns you. And so I think that drives right at the heart of it. I think that, I've held grudges against people before, and you get to a certain point in life, if you try to be introspective about it and you're really thinking about it, you realize that what the Buddha says is true, that your anger at another person, your contempt for them isn't doing anything to them. I mean, They fucked you over. You're pissed. You hate them. What is that doing to them? Not shit. It doesn't teach them anything. It doesn't it doesn't make the situation better. Well, what happens if you forgive them? Well, you feel a lot fucking better. And if that's the only thing you get out of it, it's worth it. But I think it's way more than that. It's way deeper than that. And I think that, that's why forgiveness gets stressed so much. And I think that people focus again in the Bible. I think when people read the scriptures, they focus so much on this the idea that everything is about how we relate and interact with God. But I think that the Bible is trying to tell us to also focus on how we interact with each other, and 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 to apply these principles. You know, live like Jesus. Well, what did Jesus? Jesus forgives you. God forgives you. What's the lesson there? You know, all the sinners, all the people that have done all the terrible things, every single one of them forgiven, 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 forgiven. I forgive you. I forgive you. Now, if God can do that, aren't we supposed to try to live up to try our very best to be as much like God as we can, and to approach our existence that way, right? So wouldn't it be following in the footsteps of Christ to forgive anything, everything?
Hmm.
If you don't, then you're falling short of that, right? And I think that's a powerful lesson that gets a lot of people get it. A lot of people get it. I mean, a lot of people, Christians, non-Christians, whatever, understand how important forgiveness is. So I don't want to act like that's not the case. But I do think a lot of people focus so heavily on the relationship between God and people, and the idea that it doesn't matter so much what other people think of what we do or what we think of what they do. And you do have a lot of judgmental people who not only, are not looking to forgive others, but they are just being very judgmental of others and how they live their lives. And that is not in the spirit of forgiveness, right? If somebody else is living a way that you don't approve of and it's bad, that's one thing. But to refuse to offer them forgiveness in the moment over it is something that you're withholding that forgiveness. But in the moment, you would all be better served if you had made that space in your heart for whoever it is that's in question.
So, do you think that with the act of forgiveness, do you think that that affects the potential or the being able to achieve their higher potential for each individual?
Absolutely, that is exactly correct for everyone involved.
Do you know any of the mechanics on how that works at all, or?
Well, that's a really good question too. So there's a guy named, I believe it's Stephen Thomas, but I found a lecture of his when I was looking for things about Edgar Casey, because this guy is also a scholar on the work of Edgar Casey. And anyone who might not be familiar, real quick, Edgar Casey was a Christian, and he's also most well-documented psychic in American history. And these are two concepts which don't tend to be used together in a sentence, right? Um, but uh, but anyway, this gentleman, I think his name's Stephen Thomas, um, but he in this lecture that I found, he talks about how he has studied for, I don't know, 30 plus years the mechanics of how thought in one individual is shared with other individuals and affects other individuals, right? And so there is scientific research on this, and and he makes the points that he's got plenty of evidence that can help you see that um, that this concept that when we think things, it's isolated to our heads, and the only way it affects others is through actions that are an extension of the thought and not actually directly by the thought itself affecting the person's thinking, um, but it does. So a person that's can be on the other side of the planet. But you putting forth more positive um, emotions towards that person is going to positively affect.
I was just thinking about how deep that was.
Well, just think of it. I mean, somebody does something terrible to you, really, really wrong, and the understandable reaction, and it is a reaction, it's reactive. Understandable reaction is for you to be mad, for you to be angry, and you're justified in being angry. That's the whole thing. You can be so justified in being angry, right? It's not about whether or not you've got a good excuse. You've got all the excuse you need to be angry. But when you, despite having plenty of excuse, you choose to forgive, that is transformative. And I think that is so central to everything we're talking about. And but forgiveness doesn't mean that, like, well, you stabbed me, and I forgive you. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to be wary of the potential that you could stab me again. I'm not going to expose myself to it, right? But I forgive you.
Right.
I'm not mad at you for it. You've got problems. Obviously, you fucking stabbed me, um, but I forgive you for it. My dad always used to say to me, he would say, I love you. He'd say, but I don't love everything you do. And so it's real simple, right? You don't have to love everything everyone else does to love them and forgive them and see past their errors. Because, another thing Christ says, you pick the log out of your own eye, the beam and splinter. I mean, that's the same kind of idea. And there's a reason why this stuff has to be stressed, because it is so much a part of coming into the flesh that we are exposed to the potential of us having perfectly justifiable excuses for bashing each other's brains in, but not doing it, right? Not going to do it. We're going to learn to overcome that. And we're going, because here's the thing, what ends up happening is people think they're justified. That's the next step. And then they go and do things thinking they're justified. And then they end up being the one that are initiating the aggression. And it's because they did not try hard enough successfully to forgive whatever it is they think that the other party did to them, right? They're succumbing to that, what they think is justified excuse to be angry and act on that anger.
Now, do you think that the moments that a person chooses to forgive as opposed to moments that they choose not to forgive and then retaliate like you're talking about, do you think that affects a person in other lives? Like you were talking about reincarnation prior.
Well, sure. I mean, I think that, if part of what your life's potential is to not succumb to that and to, be subjected to bullshit and forgive it, and you don't, wherever you don't live up to that potential of forgiving the bullshit that gets thrown at you, then you didn't maximize your potential as well, and you didn't grow as much in that lifetime, but you still grew something. So the next lifetime you get, there will be lessons that you still need, the aspects of existence that you still need to master. And we are really trying to master ourselves. And the self is all there is. And we didn't talk about this yet either, right? But it's another concept that's very central to talking about this. And here's another thing: people get mad at each other, and I don't like to use this terminology, that terminology. And me, I'm trying so hard. There has got to be a way that these people are maybe talking about the same thing, even if they don't think it. I'm doing that with everything. And the harder I try, the better I am at seeing it. I've heard people complain about, they hear others say, I am that I am. And they're like, oh, you're trying to usurp God. You're trying to say that by when you say that you're God, you're trying to say that that you're the one in charge, and that, I mean, they get really mad at this. But I agree. The self is all there is. The Christ consciousness is all there is. We're trying to live up to our fullest potential. Some come close. I don't think anyone ever has, other than Jesus Christ, right? It makes sense to me that way. And that's how I make sense of it. I'm sorry that I for me, faith is a participatory process. And I believe in putting faith towards things, but then looking to see that your faith is fulfilled. We're, there's no point to faith if we don't look to see if it's fulfilled or not, is there? We're going to look. There's nothing wrong with looking. We're going to want to see our faith fulfilled. And so having faith is about more than just signing off on an idea and saying, yes, I believe this. Now, what else are we going to talk about? Right? You wouldn't even bother caring if it wasn't important to you what the outcome was. The outcome is important. So faith is something that you don't get to just believe something and then throw your hands up and then say, I've got other shit to do. If it matters to you enough to put any faith toward it at all, then it's going to be an object of your observation. You're going to look for it to be fulfilled.
Amazing. Does anyone else have any questions for Ralph on Ralph Day?
I have a question for Ralph as part of sort of a series of conversations we might have here. If you think back to starting your time on the round table when you first joined the server, since you're talking about this being your anniversary here, where were you in life or in your personal development then, and where are you now, and how has that changed, because of the server? So in other words, what changes, if any, do you think have happened because of the server in you or in your life over that year?
Well, that's talk about a fantastic question. Thank you for that, brother. Yeah, I mean, when I joined the server, I'm in a very tough part of my life, still now, and uh, I was in a tougher place then. You guys have been a really good influence on me, all of you, that I've had any interaction with, and I Well, I mean, with COVID going on, that's been an aggravating factor. I mean, Discord and the level of activity that all of us have had on it, I'm sure has been greatly affected by all that shit. And, me having joined, I mean, 1 year ago today, we were just starting to get rolling along with the whole COVID beginning in April. And that was about the time I quit trimming my beard. That ended up getting kind of long. But I feel like uh, you guys have given me a chance to think again about a lot of things that I had kind of put aside while my kids were really little. Um, you know, and getting to spend time with you guys. When you got little kids and you're living the family life, it can be hard to find time to just unwind with friends where it doesn't involve the day to day. And that's something that you know I didn't get a lot of that during that time. And I'm not saying that you know I would have preferred that. I mean, I'm glad I was raising my kids and spending time with my family. um, but it's like the pendulum has swung completely in the other direction where I've spent so much time with so many of you guys, and it's been really good for me because I've been able to just unwind and hang out and chill with friends and stuff. And that's something that I didn't get to do a lot then. So I think it's healthy to have like all of that. You know what I mean? It's healthy to have a family that you focus on and takes your time up. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And it's also healthy to develop friendships that you have with other people and because those friendships you have with other people, you take the good that you get out of those friendships back to your family as well, right? And everyone benefits from it. So there's balance in everything. I definitely have developed, I have definitely improved and developed my skills of conflict resolution, which were already pretty good. It's been really good practice for customer service. I say this with all seriousness. Anybody who's served for any amount of time as a moderator, not even on this server, but also, believe it or not, you can put that shit on a fucking resume, and it does mean something. But just because you didn't get paid for it, that doesn't mean that it's not wrong. And you are performing customer service roles, and you have duties that you're to perform. And I mean, literally, like, tell me, there's no reason why you should not put it on a resume.
Well, yeah, and on that note, I'll take this opportunity to thank you, right, as the guy who runs the server. You've been a godsend to the server, being level-headed, benevolent guy who is fair and pragmatic in how you look at the server, always having an eye to its safety and its processes, right? And it's just a real good administrator, rock solid you have been, and helped to hold the community together. And absolutely, it should go on your resume. I know as well as you do. Problem solving, teamwork, management, administration, organizational skills, time management skills, dispute resolution. It goes on, the skills that we use. And like I say, you've done a great job. You've made the server stronger and better. And one of the reasons I know, with or without me, server will always do well. We have good administrators, good team like you. So thank you for that on Ralph Day. And does anyone else have a question or comment for Ralph? Ralph, do you have perhaps, or I'm sorry, Kashik, was there anything else you wanted to say or ask?
I was just going to thank him as well. Thank him for the interview, and at the same time, thank him for everything he does as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Kashika. Thank you, Shogun. Too High, thank you. Annabelle, thank you. Dulius, Harmony, NSA, my other brother from Other Ways, Open Eye Project, Potatoes, Quebecook, also known as Mr. Fernez. You got Sign in here.
Love you,
Sir
bro.
Richard Dawson, I love you, bro. And Tanevi. Who the heck is that? Basic.
Hello,
Another
hello,
new
ladies
friend.
and gentlemen.
Hey, Seth. So let me just say that was a great interview. We're going to do this interview every year on Ralph Day, the Ralph interviews. This is the second interview. You can catch the first one in member podcasts, so I post it in general. A very good interview. We'll do this once a year, so it'll be a cool way to check in on him as well as how the server progresses by doing that. And we appreciate it, Ralph. Also, I want to announce some of the other events that are coming up, and keep in mind there will be a server party after this. So one, we have a big event with Zoo, the Stormbird Zoo tomorrow. He's going to be giving his testimony as well about sort of how the server has helped him and affected his life. And he'll be talking about how he went from being homeless and addicted to drugs and alcohol and skinny as a rail to big, healthy guy who just moved into his own apartment today, who's got a car, who's got a job, and who's been sober for over a year. So big time testimony, also found Jesus Christ. We're going to talk about that.
That's going to be a great one, man.
Yeah, you're not going to want to miss that one. So we have Ralph talking about his experience with the server today. We're going to have Zoo talking about finding Jesus, overcoming addiction, homelessness, etc. Also tomorrow is Easter Sunday. So we will be doing an Easter church service of the Church of Camelot. Regardless of your faith, please join us. It's going to be at 2 p.m. Central, I think. Double check that in announcements. Prayer, scripture, celebrating the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And there will be lots of other podcasts as well. So always keep an eye on announcements channel. And keep an eye on the YouTube and BitChute channels. Make sure you check them both, different episodes in both, hundreds of great podcasts there. And make sure you join the Roundtable Discord server where you can hear interviews every day, usually at 9 Central. And we're looking forward to more interviews by Kasheka, who will now be, along with myself, one of the designated regular Roundtable interviewers. Thank you, Kasheka. Thank you, Ralph. Thank you, everybody. Let's jump to the pub and celebrate with some party time and some music, please. God bless.